Boy, what a wonderful service tonight and this morning as well. Music outstanding. And I hope, folks, you don't take for granted the good music you have here. And I certainly appreciate everybody went into it. Oh, I enjoyed those strings. I have 3 girls that play the violin, so I really enjoyed that. In fact, I was trying to think of a name, so when the Henrys go on tour, they got a name. So I thought of the Hoedown Henrys. How about that? And when they go on the circuit there, I'll have to get a little cut on whatever they do. I'm just teasing, but they did a great job. I love that song, Brethren, We Have Met to Worship. That particular song was a song that, if you recognize it, was used a lot in a movie produced by Bob Jones University years ago, back in the 70s, called Sheffy. How many have ever seen Sheffy? And the old camp meeting scenes had that, Brethren, we have met to worship. Met to worship. And I always get stirred when I hear that song and I think of Sheffy going up that mountain to pray. And it just stirs my heart. I remember as a 20-year-old, late teens, early 20s, watching that movie and God stirring my heart about prayer. It's been a journey ever since, but God did something, so I always get encouraged about that. And speaking of prayer, at 11 o'clock, if you want to join us, we're going to meet for prayer. And I'll tell you, the main thing is we're going to just meet for prayer and ask God to meet with us. And I believe in prayer. I feel like I am a kindergartner when it comes to it, but I'm on the journey, and I'm excited about what God's doing. And so if you join Pastor and I as we meet, we'd love to have you. Now, we'll be able to still pray because there's 2 of us. You know what I'm talking about? God says just need 2 or 3. He says He's in the midst. So we'll meet just together. But if you can join us from 11 o'clock, we'll just see how long the Lord leads us, at least half hour probably. And we'll spend some time just really asking God to do a work in our hearts. And if you haven't tapped into prayer, I'm hoping this week, as God will lead, we'll deal with that subject matter. I'm telling you, friend, that's where the action is. Don't miss out on prayer. All you retired folk, you ought to be the Army. I'm telling you. And I've seen people that were good Christians, boy, they retired, got a hold of prayer, and they became great Christians because they learned how important prayer is. So we'll probably deal with that as the week goes on, if the Lord will so give us liberty. Thank you for coming tonight. Wonderful Sunday night service. Of course, I'm not too surprised because the only surprise is I preached Sunday morning. Last time I was here, I just came in for a Sunday night. It was a great crowd. And so you're back tonight. Thank you for doing that. Of course, tomorrow's the big test, Monday night, 7 o'clock. Let me encourage you to be here all week long. I don't know what God's going to do, what He's going to lead to preach in, but I'm convinced He'll lead. My burden is just to preach whatever He lays on our hearts. So we're going to go to Romans 13. I want to bring you ladies up to speed, then we'll read a text and we'll begin the message. This morning I dealt with the men about the power of love. I didn't really express to them that title, but the power of love. I dealt with the fact that our culture is disintegrating, gave a study out of the 1930s and showed that this country is in a decline, and even scientifically there's a study that was done that would show that this country doesn't have a whole lot of time left. And I pointed out the problem is selfishness, and the answer is the power of love. And I will tell you, friends, you and I when we got saved, love moved into our hearts, okay? God is love, and it's more than love. It was the God who is love. Moved in, and He's the only hope we have to change us from being selfish human beings to be people, channels of the love of God. We talked briefly about that. We may develop that thought further. We diagnosed the problem more than we gave solution, but at the end we did spend just a few minutes opening the door to solution, which we may continue. But in Romans chapter 13, there's another problem he brings out. The first problem is the problem of selfishness. The answer is love. The second problem is the problem of darkness. Or could we put it this way? Deception. Let's read, if we could please, the words here in Romans 13, beginning in verse number 12. And then we'll read to the end of the chapter. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. Now, light and darkness are a very interesting study. In fact, many times we know they're opposites, but unfortunately sometimes we view them as equals. But they are not equals. One is far more powerful than the other. All we know darkness is simply the absence of light. Can I say this, friends? Darkness is wimpy. Light is powerful. Do you know if this is a darkened room, we could invade this darkened room. We could invade it with light. You know, all we'd have to do, turn on the lights, Or I have a flashlight and turn it on. Guess what? There's a beam of light that cuts through the darkness. You ever thought how powerful light is? Darkness always yields to light. Have you ever seen there's no fight? It just lays down and dies, doesn't it? But if we have a room full of light like we have now, do you know darkness cannot invade light? Have you ever heard of a flash dark? Yeah, you turn it on, there's a beam of darkness. Whoa, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? Nope, darkness cannot invade light. Not while the lights are on, no way. Do you know, my friends, sometimes we view them as equals, don't we? There's somebody in this room, maybe more than one, who is into the works of darkness. And you feel trapped, don't you? You feel like you can't let go. I've been reading a biography that's probably over 100 years old of a man who was a gambler. It's kind of interesting because it gives an insight. The biography gives an insight to that day and the underworld and stuff that was going on. Of course, with gambling, he said there were a lot of other vices that came with it, alcohol being one, but he was into all kinds of vices, and it seemed extremely powerful. His life seemed dominated by these sins. But of course, when he got saved, he said they were gone. They fell away. There's power in light, but the works of darkness sometimes seem so very powerful, but they're actually not. And in this biography, I just read the pages literally probably about an hour ago before church. When he got saved, it was very interesting. Something happened, and I'm going to use this later on in the message. Something happened that was extremely powerful in giving him a clarity when it came to his own salvation. But Romans chapter number 13 is going to deal with darkness. Now, one of the things I think of when I think of darkness is the issue of deception. Now, the reason I bring up deception, look at verse 13. It says, let us walk, what's that word? Honestly. So we clearly know that honestly is talking about light, and obviously the opposite of honesty is dishonesty, or could we say deception. This morning when I spoke to the men, I dealt with the issues that we're facing today morally and some of the moral decline, and we dealt with some of those particular issues and how that, of course, selfishness has got to be there in order for it to occur, and then once it occurs, it certainly multiplies selfishness. But there's another sin that accompanies the issues of moral impurity. The first is selfishness, but the second, according to this passage, is deception. Deception. In other words, it's like this. When somebody gets into moral impurity, guess what usually happens? They act like they're not into it. Well, let me give you the example of a teenager. I had a teenager come to me a couple of years ago. He said, now, Brother VanGelderen, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but he said, last night, he said, I didn't sleep a wink. He said, I was up all night looking at YouTube videos. Now, I didn't ask him what kind of YouTube videos he was looking at, but if I was guessing it, some of them were, I'm sure, inappropriate. Now I want to ask you, do you think it's breakfast that morning? He sat down with Mom and Dad and said, oh, by the way, Mom and Dad, I didn't sleep last night. I watched YouTube videos all night. You think that's what he said? No, you see, he acted like he didn't watch YouTube videos the night before. Do you know the problem with that? Is you begin to get a habit of deception. One of the problems with sexual sin, it causes people to be deceivers. They live with a secret part of their life. They live with a certain part of their life they don't want anybody to know about. And Satan really, I believe, wreaks havoc in that particular arena. Satan's greatest way he keeps people in bondage is secrecy. We mentioned that this morning. Secrecy. He wants people to say, I'm not to deal with it, not to get it out in the open because there's power in light. But deception is a huge issue. And I've told young people, you know, when you get victory, when you start to get victory out of the climbing out of the moral impurities, and for most young men today, it's the issue of viewing inappropriate materials on the internet. We obviously often call it pornography. But I'm dealing with young men trying to help them get a biblical pathway out of that particular problem. Many times I will say to them, your greatest problem is not lust. Your first problem is selfishness, but your second problem is this, deception. You become very good at covering your tracks. Deception, in fact, it's interesting. Literally, my wife's done more reading than I have on some of these things, but when we do some reading on this, you find out when a man comes clean with his wife, if he's had a problem viewing inappropriate materials, when he comes clean with his wife, they say it takes 6 months to a year for him to properly apologize. 6 months to a year. Why? Because his deception has become so great in his life, he doesn't even know how to be honest. Oh, he shades it a little bit in his particular direction. But Now, there's certain, let me just go over some issues of deception. Number one, covering sin. Like erasing histories on computers. I'm talking to people in this room, have looked at inappropriate things and then erased the history. And do you know what you're learning to be? A deceiver. That's what it is. I tell young people all the time, you can lie without opening your mouth. You lie by giving a false impression. You know what happens when you delete a history? You're acting like you didn't look at something you did look at. Sometimes a teenager will say to me, Brother VanGelderen, I can't tell my parents because they think better of me than that. And my answer is always the same, but you're not. You're not. This is who you've become. You don't have to stay there. But you've got to get honest about where you are. Covering sin. I'm talking to teenagers who cover sin because everywhere I go, I'm talking to teenagers who do things behind their parents' back they know their parents want them to do. In fact, I tell teenagers this way, if you've ever done something you know your parents would be grieved and burdened about if they knew about it, you'll never be right with God until you tell your parents. Because the Bible tells us there in Proverbs 28:13, he that covereth his sin shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. What does covering sin mean? Covering sin means that you're covering sin when someone has a right to know it. It can't be talking about God because you can't cover sin from God. Can you cover sin from an all-seeing, all-hearing, ever-present God? I don't think so. God knows everything about us. Verse can't be talking about God. Well, who's it talking about then? Well, it's got to be talking about covering sin from people who have a right to know. See, one of the biggest issues of deception is covering sin. Another issue is wearing masks. Wearing masks. No, I'm not talking about the paper ones. Wearing masks. You know what wearing a mask is? It's acting like you're something you're not. And a lot of people who get into addictive behavior or whatever will wear a mask. You know why? Because they want to throw people off. They say when a man gets into addictive behavior and viewing pornography, when he gets into that, he often will not allow his children to get close to him. That he keeps his hands up like this. Why? Because he doesn't want anybody to get too close. Because if anybody gets too close, they'll find out who he really is. Many times they say, after a man comes clean and has a measure of victory, he needs to age appropriately, apologize to his kids, and very clearly tell them, the reason you could not get close to me was not your fault, because many kids take the blame for it. I can't get close to my dad, and they take the blame. And they say when a man finally comes clean on it, he said, the reason you couldn't get close to me was not your fault. It was mine. I wouldn't let you get close. And many women don't feel close to their husbands. Why? Because they won't let them get close, because they don't want them to find out who they really are. See, wearing masks. Acting like we're somebody we're not. And there are a lot of masks. I preach a whole message on masks. I think I've got 20-some masks people I've read, and then my own ones from own observation. Masks people wear that really mask who they really are. A lot of times people say, I don't want people to know who I am because they may not like me. So they wear a mask to kind of throw people off. But you know what that is? Deception. You know the thing I love about God? He loves me just like I am. Don't get me wrong, he's grieved about sin in all our lives, but he still loves us, and he knows everything. It's a remarkable thing about God. But wearing masks. Okay, how about number 3? How about this one? It's a rough one. Blame. Blame is the third way people deceive. In other words, sometimes somebody will blame somebody else for their problems. It's like this. The angry father blames his wife and his kids, but he never blames himself for his outbursts. See, blame's a big one. How about this one? Sometimes it's as low as can possibly be, but sometimes a man will blame his wife for his issue of looking at filth. That, to me, is as low down as you can get low. I don't think, it's like somebody said, that's lower than a rattlesnake in a wagon's track. I mean, that's low. About as low as you can get. And so blame, people get into blame. That's deception, casting blame off ourselves and blaming somebody else for our sinful choices. Can I say this, friend? You and I cannot blame anybody for our sinful choices but us. See, otherwise you get into this modern day of blaming other people and claiming you're a victim of. Listen, friends, people can wrong us, I understand this, but we don't have to sin because people wrong us. See, that's the thing you need to understand. Okay, so blame. And manipulation is another one. It kind of goes with blame, but sometimes people covering sin know how to manipulate. Men can be very manipulative in their families to cover their own tracks. And anybody can, even teenagers, can manipulate to cover what's going on. So darkness, the works of darkness, very interesting. So kind of give you a little idea of the angles there, but let's go back, and I want you to notice something here, a grammatical phenomenon. Sorry, 6th grade teachers coming back here. Look at verse number 12. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Now notice this. Let us, therefore, cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. 13, let us walk honestly as in the day. Now there's 3 let uses in a row, okay? Now this is what they call in the Greek language a hortatory subjunctive. Aren't you glad you came tonight? You're going to go home and say, honey, man, did you see that? 3 hortatory subjunctives in a row. It has changed my life. Well, you say, what in the world are you talking about, preacher? Now, God has 2 ways that he commands us. Number 1 is what they call the imperative mood in the Greek. And you know what that is? A command. Like, love not the world. It's like when God's in our face. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. God has a right to be in our face. And I don't know about you. I'm glad he loves me enough to say, don't do that. Be not conformed to this world. Some things God asks us to do are commands. I see those a little more confrontational. But God also does what we might call exhortations. That's what a hortatory subjunctive is. It's an exhortation. So the picture would be more like God putting an arm around us and said, let's do this. Let's do this. 3 times in a row, he tells us, let's do this. Let's get rid of the works of darkness. Let's put on the armor of light. Let us walk honestly as in the day. Now, I want you to notice something because it's very interesting to me. It says, put off the works of darkness. I think we know what the works of darkness are. Obviously, isn't it interesting how sin, have you ever noticed a bar that had huge windows? Every time I go by a bar, there's no window. Have you ever noticed that certain places of sin and vice, there's no windows, there's no light, or very little light? Well, that's interesting. The works of darkness are that way. Have you ever noticed how when a young man or a man starts looking at inappropriate things on the internet, they often do it in darkness when no one is around? In secrecy, isn't it? See, darkness and secrecy are very similar because secrecy is figurative darkness. You don't want anybody to know. So you do it all alone. Those are the works of darkness. We know what the works of darkness is. In a moment, God's going to help us understand what the works of darkness are. He says, put on the armor of light. You say, how do you do that? Well, that's why we have the 3rd one. Let us walk honestly as in the day. But before we develop that word honestly, we've got to look at 3 duets of darkness that God gives us right here. And it's telling me that these 3 things are absolutely essential to get honest about if you're going to have victory. Do you want to know what they are? Well, first of all, notice what it says. Not in rioting and drunkenness. The word rioting is a very interesting word. I'm not saying you couldn't make some application to the summer of 2020, but it really is more the idea of drunkenness. It's the idea of a parade. They'd have parades through the town in New Testament times, and these parades would be in honor of the god of wine, Bacchus. They were obviously like a drunken party. So the idea of rioting there would be like a drunken party, like a party, okay, where alcohol is. God says, okay, drunkenness, not in rioting and drunkenness. So I see it clearly would be this way. God is simply saying that in order to get victory over substance abuse, you've got to get honest. You've got to shed light on it. You've got to get honest about it. So you say, what would that be? Well, clearly alcohol. If you have a problem with alcohol, you've got to get honest with the appropriate people. In a moment, we'll talk about that. You got to get honest first with God, and then you get honest with people who love you, who can help you. So that would be illegal drugs. It would be abuse of prescription drugs. It would be anything. You know, the Bible says this, all things are lawful unto me, but I will not be brought into the power of, anybody know? Any. Do you know, my friends, nothing should control a believer but Jesus Christ. If there's anything you can't control, God says it needs to go. That's one of the problems with all these things. There are other issues, but the issue is you lose control. That's why the Bible says, be not drunk with wine where it is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. I like what an evangelist friend of mine said, be not filled with spirits, be filled with the Spirit. God makes an analogy with the Holy Spirit and alcohol. Isn't that amazing? That wouldn't be an analogy we would probably dare make. Why does he make an analogy? Because when someone is filled with alcohol, they do things they would never do if they weren't filled with alcohol. And you know, if someone's filled with the Holy Spirit, they'll do things they never would do if they weren't filled with the Holy Spirit. So he makes an analogy. One's negative, extremely so, and one's positive, okay? So, but anyway, substance abuse right here. God is simply saying, friends, if you have an issue with substance abuse, then you need to get honest with the appropriate people. Get honest first with God, but then get honest with, God's saying light is what it takes. It takes honesty to get rid of this junk in your life. That's what it's talking about. Then it says, not in chambering and wantonness. Now, that's interesting. The words chambering and wantonness are very picturesque words. I love the King James English here. It's got that Victorian appeal to it that keeps it appropriate. But these are very blunt words. They are so blunt that I'm not sure I could do an appropriate word study in a mixed audience. It's how blunt they are. They're really very interesting Greek words. And what is a Greek word that's actually used in science, has been turned into a scientific term in the moral arena. So it's very interesting words. Wantonness, I will say this much, has the idea of no boundaries. Total excess when it comes to the moral arena. Just do whatever you want. There are no boundaries, wantonness. So God is saying, okay, substance abuse, honesty is extremely important in substance abuse. Number two, honesty is extremely important in overcoming sexual sin. Now, I have seen this to be extremely true. I have seen a lot of guys that are now in sustained victory who were one time what I would call addicted to looking at filth, who are now living in sustained victory, some for years and some for months, but some for years, quite a few for years. And not one of them ever was able to get victory without appropriate honesty. In fact, I'll be honest with you tonight, if I could, and I can't because we don't have Star Trek technology yet, but if I could beam them in, you know what I'm talking about? Just beam them right in. Beam them in, Scotty. Okay, if I could just beam them in here, and all the baby boomers know what I'm talking about, but anyway, if I could beam them in here tonight, I have probably at least 20 guys who would not hesitate at all to stand in front of you and give you their journey out of looking at pornography. It'd be appropriate, but it would be blunt enough you'd know exactly what they're talking about. And they do it unashamedly. They do it at the drop of a hat. You say, why? Because in their thinking, they're no longer defined by their past. They're defined by the victory that Jesus Christ is giving them day by day. And they're pumped about it, so pumped about it, they want you to know what Jesus has done for them, he can do for you. And they would give testimony just like that. But in each one of their cases, I will tell you this, they never got to victory without getting honest with the appropriate people. Some sat down with a pastor, some with other Christian leaders in their life, some with their parents, and say, I got a problem, I need out. Some of them were in for 10 years. I'm telling you, our culture's bad off. Many kids' first exposure is in their single digits of age. It's a bad deal today. And as I mentioned in Sunday school, they didn't run to the appropriate people. They kept it secret, and that was Satan's way to get them into bondage. I'm telling you, as I said last on Sunday school, I'm going to say it again because there's some new folks here. I'm going to tell you, young people, I want you to understand if you are ever exposed to somebody trying to get you to look at filth, you need to make a beeline to the closest person who loves you and cares about you because it's your greatest protection at that moment of temptation. The greater protection is innocence. That, of course, needs to be maintained even after temptation. That's why you run. And innocence is a great protection. But unfortunately, in the world in which we live, I deal with young people all the time, made a terrible choice when they were exposed. They didn't run to somebody who loved them, and as a result, got curious, and they regret it to this very hour. I'm talking to people in this room completely identify with what we're talking about, light. Light. When somebody gets into sexual sin, friends, it takes honesty to get out of it. You've got to get honest with somebody. Satan will always lie to you and say, you can get rid of it on your own. But I'm telling you, nobody ever has it I know of. Nobody. Because secrecy is Satan's greatest weapon to get you back into it. Honesty is an unbelievably powerful thing. It's light. So the second one is the issues of moral issues. And we can talk about all kinds of moral issues. And by the way, both genders on this deal, friends. In the culture in which we live, and because the access of the internet, it's both genders. In fact, it's interesting. Well, I'll wait on that till a little bit later. But then it says, not in strife and envy. So the first issue would be what we call substance abuse. Second issue would be moral issues. The third issue is going to be, I'm just going to call it anger issues. Not in strife and envying. Now, I'll be honest with you. I grew up in a pastor's home, and I'm just going to be dead honest with you. I probably grew up fairly naive, you know what I'm talking about, which I don't regret at all. But my dad pastored a church, fairly sizable church outside Chicago, so I went to church every time the doors were open. There were probably 500 people that would come on a Sunday night at the church at its peak, and so it was a larger church and a lot of people in the church. And I don't know about you, but I kind of thought everybody that came to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night were sterling Christians, you know. I thought they were phenomenal Christians. You know what I later found out? In some cases, that wasn't true. There are several issues that surfaced in some of their lives. Thank the Lord, most of them have been have gone on and been tremendous testimonies. But there is a handful I look at and say, oh, yeah, that makes sense now. Yeah, I see that. That's tragic, but it makes sense now. One of the issues is the issue of anger. I don't know about you. I guess I grew up and thought anybody would come to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night didn't have an anger problem in their home. That's what I thought anyway. Boy, was that naive. And I'm going to just be honest with you. You can tell I'm old, okay? But I am telling you, I remember just even a few short years ago being shocked with some things that happen in Christian homes. Now, I hate to disillusion some of you. Did you know that in some Christian homes, moms and dads yell at each other in front of the kids? That stunned me. It really did. Now, I kind of knew it, but when somebody's counseling with me and they're telling me, I'm going, unbelievable. I'm talking like a wife in front of a bunch of kids saying, your daddy is the reason there's a problem in this house. And I'm talking about a guy who was a decent guy. He had his issues, but he wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a monster either. And your daddy's this, your daddy's this, your daddy's this. And I'm thinking, oh, it's terrible. Then I heard another situation with a husband. Your mother is the reason we got this. She may have her issues, but she's not a monster. And I'm going to just say it right now. If you got issues with each other, take them behind closed doors. Don't drag your kids in front of it, because I'm dealing on a weekly basis with the collateral damage of parents who yell at each other, have anger problems, and dealing with kids that are all messed up. One time getting angry with your spouse in front of your kids is one time too many. And if that's you, I'd go home tonight and apologize and ask God, by the grace of God, not to do it anymore. And I'd get to your pastor and say, I got an anger problem. I'm just going to be honest about it. And say, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to get victory. I'm just telling you, strife in Christian homes is a problem. Did you know I expect there to be strife in unsaved homes? I remember the next door neighbors where I grew up. Man, they were always yelling at each other, yelling at the kids, and I thought, well, they're unsaved. You know, that's what unsaved people do. I didn't realize Christian people did that. But slowly but surely, as time has gone on, I've realized there's a lot of issues in homes. And particularly, I suppose, I knew there was anger toward the kids, angry dads and angry moms, because I've dealt with that for years. I've known that, but I guess I was stunned when I found out realized that there was, much as they were, of parents fighting in front of their kids. That's strife and envying. Now, here's what you understand. What this passage is seeming to indicate, if you've got an anger problem, the only way out is to get honest, first with God, and then with the appropriate people in your life. I was talking with a lady that works in the Army, and she works with problems in homes and in the Army, and she said one of the biggest problems that we find very difficult to solve is angry fathers, angry dads. So the problem is, from a secular viewpoint, she said they rarely change. It's just management. Rarely do they change. And I thought to myself, you know what? Even in Christian circles, I would say an angry man, it's rare to see him get broken about his anger. Now, many times it is generational. It's like the man who came to me one time and said, Brother VanGelderen, Sunday night you described me. He was just a young man in his 20s, had a family, but he said, you described me Sunday night. He said, my dad's angry. He said, I hate to tell you he's a pastor, but my dad's angry, my grandpa's angry. And he said, you know what? So am I. I understand that anger can be generational. Bitterness certainly provokes the next generation of bitterness, no doubt about it. Anger is a bad deal. But here's the point. So many times, angry people never get honest about it. They blame their wives, blame their kids, or moms that are angry, blame their husbands, blame the kids, whatever, and it's a mess. But I'll tell you, on the Christian side of things, I have heard of angry men getting broken before God, getting broken before the appropriate men, and saying, I don't care what it takes, I got to get victory on my anger. I'm just telling you right now, anger is not one of those deals you've got to deal with on your own. You have got to get honest. That's what the Bible is saying. I'm begging you, if you've got an anger problem, I am begging you, make a beeline to your pastor and say, we got to talk, I've got a problem. See, here's the issue. Light's powerful. Light's unbelievably powerful. And over the years, I have watched honesty do amazing things. That very biography I was referencing a moment ago, this guy, this gambler, was on a journey. He was under deep conviction. And he was seeking salvation. He couldn't find it. He didn't understand it yet. And so there was a big revival meeting going on, and he asked if he could say something. Amazingly, they let him say something. He got up in front of a crowd, 1,500 people, and he told them his agony, that he couldn't find salvation. He needed to be saved. Would they pray for him? And asked an old preacher to stand to his feet. The old preacher stood to his feet and said, anybody else here feel like that? People all over the audience stood, said, I'm not saved, but I want to be saved. And he said he prayed an impassionate prayer for God's mercy and God's work. Make a long story short, it was within 24 hours he came to full peace that he was saved. You know, I think the key is God makes it very clear that he blesses us when we're humble or honest. God gives grace to the humble. He resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. See, when we're talking about light or honesty, one of the issues of honesty is it's humility. It's humbling to get honest, isn't it? I like a definition of church I heard recently. I think it's a great definition. Church is where you ought to be able to hurt out loud. I think that's a really good definition of church. We have small Sunday school tables at my home church, and I'm not there very often, but I've been there a couple of times. I remember one time my Sunday school's teacher sat down at the table, and he was kind of bummed out. He said, I got to be honest with you. He said, I got angry this week. He said, I got so angry, he said, I kicked the dog. He said, I'll be honest with you, I did the same thing. I started laughing. He said, I kicked the dog. He said, I think I hurt it for good. And the dog was limping around, and he was all bummed out. But you know, I remember that Sunday school session. You know why? Because we sat there, and I think men just started getting honest about some issues in our life, and we prayed about it. You know, I walked away from that Sunday school table, don't miss this. I walked away, don't miss this, graced. Graced. But you know our problem is? We come to church, we put on the mask, don't we? You know, the truth is, you got problems. You know, you say, preacher, how could you say this? You don't even know us, because I got problems. I'm assuming you do too. And the truth is, we're all growing spiritually, and we all need God. And I will tell you, you know what revival is? When God's people just get flat out honest. And, you know, we sang some great revival songs, and I really commend your music, like I mentioned a moment ago, and I hope you appreciate your music. But I will tell you, in almost every revival meeting I've been in, we have sang Revive Us Again. You didn't disappoint me. We've already done it. It's a great song. I'm not diminishing the song. Great song. But the greatest revival song I have ever heard, I've never heard sung in a revival meeting. You know what it is? It's me. It's me. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. That's the greatest revival song I've ever heard. You know why? Because that's revival. You know what revival is saying? God, I got problems. God, I'm the one in need. It's not my wife. It's not my kids. It's me. You get people starting to pray that prayer, and I'm telling you, you got revival. It's already there. It's not coming. It's already there. See, honesty, it's the core issue when it comes to revival, and it's the core issue to getting rid of deception. Now, many of these young men that are on this way out of moral impurity, particularly in the viewing arena, looking at inappropriate things, I'll tell them, you've gotten two problems as a result of your sin. Selfishness has gone wild in your life, and so has deception. I said, you got to fight both hard. So I said, you cannot be deceptive about anything. You've got to be painfully honest about everything to the appropriate people. And you know what I found? When they start doing that, they get free from the awful habit of being deceptive. And it's a wonderful thing. So honesty, as I mentioned, just like light, and you have to understand something about light. When you move toward light, guess what happens? There's more light, and there's less darkness. Guess what happens when you move away from light? There's less light, and there's more darkness. See, every step you take, in fact, in an audience like this tonight, God is dealing with somebody saying, you need to get honest. You've got to get honest with this. Now, the first thing you got to do is get honest with God. That's 1 John 1:9. If we confess, you know what confess means? Just get honest with God. He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. No doubt about it, that's the first one we need to get honest with. But you know, friends, many times I've seen it very clearly. Honesty doesn't stop there. If you cover your sins, you won't prosper, okay? Again, you can't cover sins from God, so that's not talking about God. But if you confess and forsake, you'll have mercy. Well, who are you confessing it to? People who have a right to know. People who have a right to know. If you're a teenager, doing stuff behind your parents' back, it's getting right with mom and dad. It's sitting down at the table and say, hey, mom and dad, I got to talk to you. There's some things I've been doing behind your back you need to know about. That's the idea. It'd be like a husband or a wife saying, you know, I got to come clean on some things. I got to get right. And I realize if it's a very serious situation, may need to get your pastor involved. So the disclosure, you navigate the disclosure with grace, because those can be very volatile situations. I grant that. I get that. I understand how volatile some situations are. I'm telling you, I'm privy to some things going on sometimes. I'm thinking, whoa, that's rough. Some just terrible sin that's been swept under the carpet sometimes for years. And the disclosure is a very painful process, I should say. It's like a book I read, and one of the chapters was the best, worst day of my life. And it was when this man disclosed his secret sin. So it called it the best, worst day of his life. And so I don't minimize the fact that sometimes there has to be aid and pastoral care and help on navigating this. But what I am saying, friends, is confession starts with God, but there's some cases where it needs to continue. What you're doing is putting light on it. As I mentioned, I don't know how many times at a campfire service we have on our Friday night War Special Forces when we're doing our Christian school meeting. I don't know how many times at a campfire service I have seen the honesty of young people absolutely set them free and also use it to work in the hearts of others. I remember I was in a large Christian school down in Florida. We were weren't able to have the campfire service on a Friday night, so we had a Friday afternoon. They scheduled one class hour. We actually ended up taking 2 class hours. Testimony after testimony, and I remember the testimony that broke it wide open. I mean, it broke it wide open. A kid got up, about a junior in high school, and he said, I'm sick of it. He said, I'm sick of it. He said, I'm so sick of the fact that I'm addicted to looking at filth. And he said, I'm done with it. I want out of it. And he just gave a powerful testimony. I saw a young man in the front row who I know had the same problem. You say, why? Because he was in agony. Literally had a grimace on his face. He's like this. For about a half hour, just wrestling with God. Finally, he got up and gave a testimony. He said, I'm just like so-and-so. I want out too. I need help. And I'm telling you, friends, you know what happens when these kids start coming clean? They may do it in a little way that's a little messy and make some of us older people uncomfortable. But I'm telling you what, there's power in light. There's power in light. The truth is, we don't like that. It makes us uncomfortable. But there's not a revival I've read about wherever sin was swept on the carpet. Every revival I've ever read about, people got honest with the appropriate people. The last citywide revival in North America was probably 1971 in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. They had 7 weeks of nightly meetings. They filled the largest auditorium Saskatoon, Saskatchewan had to fill. It was an amazing revival. But in that revival, the chief of police said, and he's not a believer, and he was not a believer when he said this, he said, I'm not a believer in God. He said, but I am a believer in revival. Go figure on that one. He said, because during that revival, something happened in my police career that has never happened in my entire life. He said, we had a stream of people coming to the police department and confessing unsolved crimes. He said, I have never had that happen in my entire career. He said, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in revival. Wow. You know what that's called? Light. Light. If you're in addiction to sin right now, I don't care what the sin is. I don't care if it's anger. I don't care if it's worry, frustration, whatever. I guarantee you one of the things that's keeping you defeated is secrecy, darkness. You got to get honest with God. And then get honest with other people if there's appropriate people to do. I realize not every situation do you need to get honest with other people, but many times the sins we're talking about, you need help on the way out. Moral sins, God says for sure. Anger sins, God says for sure. Substance abuse, God says for sure. I'm just telling you right now, if there's substance abuse, if there's moral issues, if there's anger, God's saying the only way out, you got to get honest with the appropriate people. Yeah, get honest with people who can help you. It's really a stunning thing. Now, back to just understanding here just a little bit about light as we kind of work through this. When I was just young, I've been in youth evangelism since 1984. That's a long time. But shortly before that, for just a short amount of time, I was an interim youth pastor at my home church for my father. I had a youth pastor resign, and I just graduated from college, so he said, Jim, can you fill in for a few months until I get a new youth pastor? So I think it was 9 months I was a youth pastor. The only time in my life I've been a youth pastor for 9 months. I was single, I was young, and I was dumb. Okay, so I fell into a little bit of the trap of bigger and better. If you've never been a youth pastor, you don't understand this. But these were, I'm going to just tell you, outside Chicago, and their parents had money. Many of their parents made 6 digits. Now, this is the 1980s. That's a lot of money, 6 digits back in that day. So impressing these kids was kind of hard. You could take them up to Great America, but they'd been there. You know, they probably had summer passes. No big deal there. You could take them a lot of places, and it was no big deal. So I was thinking to myself, what can I do to impress these city slicker rich kids? You know what I'm talking about? What can I do to just... So you know what I did one day? I said, okay, kids, we're going to go spelunking. They said, what? I said, we're going in a cave, and guess what? There's no fluorescent lights. This is off-the-grid cave. You know what I'm talking about? Man, did those kids, they thought that was going to be great. I packed out 2 buses, had a girls' bus, guys' bus. We drove down to southern Indiana. You kind of know, down in that area. Had a guy, Dan Teeters. You know Dan Teeters? Old Dan Teeters said, I know where a cave is. Out in the middle. So we parked on a dirt road. There's no signs. There's no booth there to pay money. You know what I'm talking about? It's just a cave. And so we're walking through this forest, and there's a little grotto. Had a little grotto, kind of a rock formation come out, and was just perfect. Right as we came up to the mouth of the cave, a bat flew out. You could not have timed it better. The girls started freaking out. The guys thought it was great. You know what I'm talking about? There was a say you had to get in that cave, and you had to kind of worm your way down, and your feet would go into a mountain stream. Of course, you get everybody down there in the mountain stream, and then the guide starts talking about the time there was a big rainstorm upstairs, up top, and the mountain stream started getting higher. You know, all the kids are freaking out. You know how it is. You know, these are city slicker kids. You know, he had them. And so we were going through that cave, and I mean, we went in a long way, probably half mile or so. And it was not one of those one had big things. It was pretty much, if you had claustrophobia, you would have freaked out, okay? It would have been probably your last day on earth, okay? But, I mean, we're working through that thing. Of course, these are kids. They're just there's bats chirping, hanging up downside down. I mean, this is the real deal. And these city slicker kids, they thought they died and gone to heaven. Man, this was unbelievable. They never done anything like this before. Now, you country kids, no, you've done stuff like, I don't know if they have caves around here, but anyway, and so we're going through that thing, and wouldn't you know it, about a half mile in, one of our young ladies stuck a foot in her crack and sprained her ankle, and it swelled, and we couldn't get her out of the crack. Yeah, I'm thinking, how am I going to explain that? I'm envisioning the phone call. Yes, I'm sorry to tell Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so your daughter is a half mile under the earth, and we can't get her out. That's going to be a fun phone call, you know what I'm talking about. Fortunately, we had with us a physics teacher. Make sure if you go in a cave, you always carry a physics teacher with you. You have fulcrum, you know, mechanical advantage, and he got a rock in that thing, and he literally maybe moved it a half an inch enough to get her swollen foot out of there. Then we had to carry her out. And she wasn't one of the lighter weight girls. I'll just leave it at that. And we had to carry her out. One guy is going on all fours. He's got this girl on his back, and he's going on all fours trying to get the girl out of there. While this is going on, kids are going nuts. They're all over the cave. I have no idea where they are. I mean, who knows what's going on? A girl gets hypothermia. They call in 911. She almost dies. I mean, it was one of those. Kids came back from that trip, and they said, Mom, Dad, it was great. 2 kids almost died. It was great. Shortly thereafter, my dad said, you need to go back to school. Okay, but anyway. Now, there's something you'll learn about a cave. It's absolute darkness like you've never seen. But I will say this about a cave. When you're coming toward the opening, you see a thin shaft of light. And when you get toward that thin shaft of light, you know you're getting close to the opening. Of course, if you have a guide, that's very helpful, which we did have. But it's like this. Every step you take toward that light, guess what? There's more light and there's less darkness. But every step, it would be foolish, but you can imagine being lost in a cave. If you saw light, every step you took toward that light, there'd be more light, less darkness. How foolish would it be to turn around and take steps away from the light? Because every step you took away from the light, there's less light and more darkness. This message for some of you is light. And I'm going to just tell you right now, if you walk away from the light of the Word of God, there's going to be more darkness and less light. For some of you, God brought you here tonight for you to hear a warning that the works of darkness are a bad deal, but you don't have to be stuck forever. Satan wants you to think you're stuck forever, but you're not. Darkness is wimpy. And there's the light of the Word of God, and there's the light of God Himself. And I will tell you, friends, when you take steps toward the light, and you say, I'm going to get honest with God about this, and then I'm going to get honest to walk in the day, is get honest with the appropriate people, I will tell you, friend, there will be a day when you will be honest, you'd be honest with anybody and wouldn't bother you at all. Like I said, I could bring at least 20 young men right now here who would unashamedly tell you about their past because they're no longer defined by it. They're not trying to hide it. That's in the past. They are now defined by the fact that Jesus Christ is setting them free, and they're pumped up about it. They tell anybody. They tell a stranger on the street if God wanted them to. You know why? Because they're not trying to act like they're something they're not. See, it's a wonderful thing not to have to act like you're something you're not. It's a wonderful thing to say, you know what, I got problems, but Jesus Christ meets my needs all the time. And I'm going to tell you, every day of my life and every day of your life, we need Jesus every moment of every day. You and I can't live without Him. We're not talking about gritting your teeth and trying harder. We're talking about the fact that Jesus Christ can enable you to do His will every moment of every day. I will tell you, friends, I like the song Moment by Moment. What do you think? I tell people I'm not a day-by-day guy. You might be a better Christian than I am. I can't do the day-by-day stuff, but I sure can do the moment-by-moment stuff. Actually, I'm kind of teasing with you because if you read the text of day by day, he was actually a moment-by-moment guy too. Day by day and with each passing moment, strength I find. I'm telling you, friends, you and I need Jesus all the time. So why do we act like we don't need Him? I'm telling you, friends, we all got issues. Our issues may be different, but all of us have things we need to grow in. In fact, if I asked you to write down the 5 most pressing things you'd like to see victory over, I bet you every one of you, if you could be honest, you could think of 5 things. You know what? Yeah, I'm a little short-tempered there. I get impatient, and there's times I get worried, and there's times I doubt God, and you could write down 5 things. You know what we need? We need to walk with Jesus. All I'm saying, I'm not saying you have to go out air your dirty laundry with everybody, but it shouldn't be a big deal if you did. Because you're just saying, I need Jesus just like everybody else. But I'm looking to Jesus, I'm excited about what He's done, and I'm excited about what He's going to do. See, light, the power of light. And like I said, you read any revival history on planet Earth, you're absolutely amazed at how honest people are about their lives. It's amazing. In fact, it would make you uncomfortable. If I had the book By My Spirit by Jonathan Goforth, if you read it, you'd be uncomfortable. Because in the revivals that occurred under Jonathan Goforth, there was an honesty that was extremely painful because many of the leaders had some major issues in their lives, and the laymen as well. And it was a really remarkable thing. But revival testimonies, and there's so many revival anthologies I've read where eyewitness accounts of revival, and you're always struck by the honesty. Because people, when you're walking in the light, that's the way it is. So, the 2 things that are most important than being honest about is first honesty with God, and like I said, honesty with others. Now, I could come to verse number 14, but we've kind of run out of time here on the issue of light. But the thing I do want to challenge each one of you with is the fact that there is a power in honesty. Let me just end with a testimony that's kind of an uncomfortable testimony, but one I hope will be a help to you. And I just want to share it with you. I had a young man come to me probably 2.5 years ago, and he wanted to marry my daughter. And I sat down with him, and I said, well, how's the issue? How's your issue? Have you ever looked at pornography? And he began to tell me some things about his life that I was unaware of, and that he had been exposed early on, and that he had, how do I say this, periodic defeat on a regular basis. So I looked at him and I said, I'm sorry. I said, it's not going to work. And his last failure had been just a couple weeks before. So I said, I'm sorry. It's not going to work. Very kind, but very firm, because I just felt like this isn't going to work. And I felt like I could not be a part of his recovery in light of his requests, so I had to just kind of leave him, just pray for him and leave him. Well, for a while, he spiraled, and obviously he was stunned by it. He had been interested in my daughter at that point for 7 years. He had not wavered in his believing she was the one, and 7 years. Well, I kept an eye on him because I was interested in his recovery, but at that point I had to die to his possibility. Well, about a year later, took him a few months just to pull out of it. From the moment I talked to him to this very day, by the way, he never went back as far as viewing. But he was really wanted to get into sustained victory. And to make a long story short, he began to pull out of the hole he was in and began to recognize, okay, and he began to get some victory. But the thing that turned the corner for him was this principle of light. So he had a young man come to him and was deeply defeated in the moral arena personally, just personal issues, is not with other people, just personally, viewing and other things. And so had another young man come to him and was just totally in despair. So they set up a daily accountability system, and that daily accountability system began to be lifeblood. Every day they would Marco Polo one another, and they would report on 3 areas. Number one, they would report on anything viewing-wise. It didn't have to be going to the internet. It could be a jogger. It could be a billboard. It could be anything that was inappropriate. And if they failed in their viewing, they had to say, well, I saw a jogger out of the corner of my eye, and I did look. And they'd have to report that. So they got somebody else involved. I think there were 3 of them, and they reported everything. They reported reported joggers. They reported billboards. If they saw maybe out in the distance there was a billboard that might be inappropriate, if they looked, then they'd have to report that. They'd go from a 10 was no problem, to 9 had a problem, a small problem, but I had a problem, and they'd have to explain it. Well, they started doing that on a daily basis. So I want to ask you this. How would you like to report on your thought life every 24 hours? That's what they began to do. Any sensual thoughts that were caved into, they had to report. They were appropriate, don't get me wrong, but they had to report it nonetheless. Every 24 hours. Well, this young man began to see sustained victory. Unbelievable sustained victory. Word got out that this accountability system was going on. He began setting up other accountabilities, and he began to work with other guys, and he began to set up trios of young men that would report to each other on a daily basis, and many of them began to report that they began to get in a victory they had never experienced to that point. Do you see the power of light? If you're going to report on your thought life every 24 hours, you're probably going to think before you think. You're going to think, I don't think I'm going to think that. I don't think I'm going there. I don't want to report that tonight. Well, they began to get honest with each other, and this young man got into a sustained victory he never thought was possible. Well, I felt enough time had passed. I asked him, I said, would you travel with us in the fall of 20? I said, would you travel with us? Again, I wanted to invest in his life. I wanted to see him. And so he began to travel, and my wife spent hours with him just traveling. We were out west and spent hours and asked him every question you could ask. I mean, listen, if you can imagine a woman sitting next to you who's 30 years older than you, asking every embarrassing question that she can possibly ask, and he said, I will answer any question you ask. And he did. Tough questions. I mean, questions I can't even mention in a mixed audience. And he was extremely honest about where he'd been, where he was, everything, just the whole night. My wife spent hours with him. Well, we came to a church in Ohio, and, I'm sorry, I told you I wasn't going to mention Ohio, but anyway, I came to a church in Ohio, and we were having a tent meeting because this is COVID and they couldn't meet inside, so he said, why don't you come to a tent meeting? And one of the nights I said to him, why don't you give a testimony about your issue? It was the first time in his life he'd ever given a candid testimony. As he stood to give his testimony that night, I was struck. It was honest. It was appropriate, but it was honest. It was blunt, and it didn't put him in good light at all. Not his past, that is. But then he began to talk about sustained victory and began to talk about what God was doing in his life. And I could just tell you there, as a preacher, I was sitting in that audience and saying, this is powerful. It was like the Holy Spirit said to me after that thing, that guy is ready to have God use him. I said, what he needs is a wife. And so God put me in a situation where I had to think, is he the one or not? But he'd have to come back, knocking again, because I told him pretty much, nope, not now, not ever. He'd have to come again. So I saw God use him. That night, we gave an invitation to that church. And a youth pastor came forward sobbing and confessed his issue of looking at film. I sat in the office with the pastor, myself, this youth pastor, and this young man who's about 25 years old. And I watched him counsel that youth pastor, and I'm thinking to myself, that's wise. Man, that's powerful. Wow, that's amazing. I was blown away. The pastor of that church said, Brother VanGelderen, I brought you in. He said, I thought revival was the roof blowing off. I was quoting a guy by the name of Joe Church, who greatly affected Roy Hessian, who wrote Calvary Road. And in that book, he says, the guy, Joe Church, who saw revival in Africa, said, revival's not the roof blowing off, it's the bottom falling out. He said, when you came, he said, I probably imagined revival as the roof blowing off. He said, this week the roof didn't blow off, the bottom fell out. And now for probably a year and a half, 2 years, he's been working with many of his men who have gotten clean about the fact that they had moral issues in their life, most of the time viewing. And he says it's just been counseling them, moving them out into greater victory. But it all started that night. All started that night with that testimony, and it really brought kind of what you might call a backwards revival in that church that continues to this moment. Make a long story short, in December, his father talked to me and said, would you ever reconsider our son for your daughter? And I said, absolutely. God's already ministered to my heart. I believe it's God's will. Make a long story short, they were married this past summer. And my son-in-law does a podcast every month called Satisfied, dealing with moral purity issues. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I could call my son-in-law right now. I could take out my cell phone and I could call my son-in-law right now and I could say, tell me about your thought life in the last 24 hours. And he would tell me. I could say, tell me about your thought life in the last 2 weeks. He would tell me. You know why, young folks and older folks, I want to tell you why. Because there's power in light. He has learned the power of light. And he's told me, he says, I cannot keep a secret from your daughter. He said, I've got to tell her everything. He said, because I never want to go back to that deception. I want to be honest about everything. And I will tell you, friends, this has been a very personal journey for me. This is not an easy thing that I've been through. But I am telling you this. This generation's in trouble. And I am telling you there is a way out. I believe we could see revival, but we will never see revival while we keep everything hidden. There's got to be the power of light. And some of you kids that think you're past hope and think you've messed up and think God can't use you, it's a lie from the pit of hell. God's bigger than that. He can reclaim anybody in this room. He can clean you up. He can purify you in a way that is, I don't know how to explain it, more pure than somebody who's never been purified. I mean, he can do that which is miraculous. But I will tell you this, it won't be in darkness. It will not be in darkness. You got to make the decision. I don't care how much it hurts. I don't care what I do. I'm getting honest. I'm getting honest with God. I'm going to get honest with appropriate people. Listen, you got an anger problem? I'm not just talking about lust. You got an anger problem? You need to get to this pastor. I'm telling you right now, you need to tell him, Pastor, I got an anger problem. I'm done with it. You want revival? That's how you get revival. I got an anger problem. I need victory. I don't care. Listen, give me a class, give me a curriculum. I'll do whatever. Give me 24-hour accountability about my anger problem. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm going to put light on the deal. There's power in light. I want to tell you, friends, it doesn't matter what darkness you're in, it's wimpy. It seems powerful, doesn't it? Lust seems so powerful, doesn't it? I can't get out of this. My mind's a garbage pit. I can't get out of this. It's a lie from the pit of hell because I'm telling you, light will clean it out. The truth is we're not willing to get the light on the deal. Light's uncomfortable. But that's where the power is. Let us walk honestly. Is in the day. You know what's nice about the daytime? There's no darkness. And God is helping us understand what that is spiritually. It's honesty.